Dobry večer, laskavo prosimo, Ukrainian. I'm working on it. So I tried to say good evening and welcome to this episode of Ukrainian. Today is the 32nd anniversary of the Declaration of State Sovereignty of Ukraine. This document would eventually serve as the basis for the active Declaration of Independence of Ukraine, so it only seems fitting that we talk about the systemic attempt to wipe the Ukrainian people off the face of the earth using pathetic, inefficient filtration camps. Gas chambers are two models of German efficiency, as filtration centers are two models of Soviet-style inefficiency, and an ambiguity to preserve their feigned deniability. Cite Little Green Men. There's a podcast that I love. It's called Ukrainecast. The BBC, they do things so well. And they have an incredible interview with a woman named Victoria. Early in the war, she watched her 12-year-old daughter and her husband both die in front of her. They were in their car. They were fleeing Chernihiv, and Russian shelling hit their car and killed her 12-year-old daughter and her husband on impact. She survived and managed to get to her 1-year-old daughter, and the two of them then spent several days at a filtration center in the basement of a school. When asked about the conditions in the school, she described them as stuffy, hot, and dark. Others have described there being undrinkable water, causing nausea, diarrhea, with no access to adequate plumbing or toilets or any kind of facilities, and that the air quality was so poor that many people suffered tremendously from respiratory illnesses, including COVID. While she was there, 12 people died. And they kept track of the dead using a piece of coal that they found in the basement to keep little notches on the wall. The bodies weren't removed. They stayed in the basement with everyone else until the Russian troops decided it was time to that everyone had passed filtration, and at that point the dead people got to leave too and get buried. So that's just one story. Just giving a general overview about what these filtration camps, which some people refer to as concentration camps, are. They're being used by the Russian forces during this invasion of Ukraine, and it's a way for them to process Ukrainian citizens in regions under Russian occupation, and it's a way for them to transfer them to Russia. So there's beatings, torture by electricity, and killings. These have all been reported by people who have been interrogated in filtration camps. The number of citizens that have been relocated to Russia is not currently known and can't be independently verified. But they estimate that it's somewhere between 600,000 and 1.6 million have been forcibly relocated to Russia, and of those, about 250,000 of them are children. Shocker, the Russian government denies it is forcibly removing Ukrainians to Russia and calls the deportations evacuations. Yep. Love it. So where are these filtration camps located? As of June of this year, most filtration camps have been attested to be located in towns and villages across the Donetsk People's Republic, which doesn't really exist, but it's Russian controlled, with the camps occupying what had been public buildings like schools, cultural centers, and sports halls. This month, in a statement to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a U.S. diplomat stated that the U.S. had identified at least 18 filtration camp sites set up by Russians both in Ukrainian and Russian territory, with preparations of filtration camps having been undertaken even before the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th of this year. So, what happens? Filtration usually ends in one of two ways. Either a detainee has their passport and all of their documents taken from them, and they are given a new document saying that they have passed filtration and that they can move about in these Russian territories, but they'll probably be detained for further interrogation again, depending on how the Russian troops feel. The other option is that you will be beaten, you will be tortured with electricity, you will be murdered, and usually the fact of your death will be denied. You will disappear and go missing, but in fact you will be dead. In May of this year, videos with Ukrainian civilians apologizing to Russian soldiers, saying that they had undergone a denazification course, because we all know that the Ukrainians here are behaving like the Nazis, right? So on social media, they put up this video of them saying that they're so sorry to the Russian soldiers, and they're so thankful for these courses that kind of remind me of Mao's re-education courses, where basically there was physical violence, peer pressure, embarrassment, humility, stripping people down naked, to get them to come around to the right way of thinking. There are, at this time, we know of at least 3 or 4 instances of Ukrainian civilians getting killed and their documents destroyed after they had a conflict with their teacher. So that's how those classes have been going. Here's something from the United States. So the United States ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, said, and I quote, "I do not need to spell out what these so-called filtration camps are reminiscent of. It's chilling, and we cannot look away." She cited reports that FSB agents confiscated passports, IDs, and mobile phones, as well as reports of Ukrainian families being separated. The U.S. envoy to the OSCE, Michael Carpenter, told the organization's permanent council that according to credible reporting, Ukrainian civilians in the filtration camps were interrogated, and those suspected of ties to independent media or the military were beaten, tortured before being transferred to the Donetsk region, where they reportedly were disappeared or were known to be murdered. So a lot of people have been comparing that situation to what the Russian Federation's troops did in Chechnya. So I thought it would be worth taking a look at kind of what the allegations were, how pursuing justice in any kind of judicial venue went for the Chechens, so that we can stop the crap now, and stop pretending that saying, we're going to persecute these things in a court means something. Here we go. Okay, so from a Chechen official, Russian camps were used for extermination. Russian forces in Chechnya were using filtration camps as part of a broader effort to exterminate the Chechen people, according to one of them who survived and now serves as the Chechen health minister. In his briefing in Washington on May 17, 2001, the health minister said that he personally saw Russian troops engage in tortures that can be imagined only by a totally depraved human mind. The beating of the wounded on the stumps of their amputated arms and legs, the use of electric shocks to genitalia, exposure to extreme cold, faked executions, and suffocation. Tragically, he said, this is not the work of individual sadists, but rather a system created by the state and intended to destroy the Chechen nation. From Russian bases, the prisoners were sent to a series of filtration camps and Russian prisons, each of which had a special Chechen department with torture facilities. The minister said 90% of those that begin this cycle disappear without a trace, noting that disappeared means dead. If the Chechens held there die, Russian authorities prepare documents saying that they have been released, and then they dispose of their bodies. Chechens remained hopeful that Western countries would intervene to help, but he reported that his recent experience at the United Nations Human Rights Commission hearings was not encouraging. There, the Russian delegation objected and prevented him from finishing his report because he referred to his homeland of Chechnya, and not a single other member of the commission objected to the Russian veto. Okay. So let's see how pursuing kind of their claims of genocide and crimes against humanity went for Chechnya, shall we? First, violations of humanitarian law. The war in Chechnya was characterized by egregious violations of international humanitarian law. The Russian military had perpetrated violent crimes upon the civilian population in Chechnya, including mass killings, deliberate and indiscriminate shelling and bombing of civilian areas, arbitrary arrest and detention, torture and beatings, systemic rape, and forced repatriation into the Chechen war zone. Russian military tactics adhered to a pattern of directly targeting civilians. These tactics breached the requirement enumerated in Article 48 of the First Additional Protocol to the Geneva Convention. As part of its campaign in Chechnya, however, the Russian military has carried out 3 large-scale civilian massacres. Through detailed interviews with over 500 witnesses, Human Rights Watch documented these massacres. In the village of Alkan-Yurt, Russian troops killed 17 civilians during a looting spree and burned homes and raped several women. In the Aldi district of Grozny, Russian forces shot more than 60 civilians who were waiting in the streets and in their yards for soldiers to check their resident documents. The most egregious, however, violation of humanitarian law occurred within the detention centers known as filtration camps. Russian troops often detained Chechens for not having proper registration papers and a residence permit, or based on suspicion of being a separatist fighter. Women and children were detained on suspicion of being related to a Chechen fighter. The Russian government had used various tactics to conceal the existence of these detention centers. For instance, they temporarily removed hundreds of detainees from the notorious Chernokosovo camp during a visit from the Council of Europe monitors. Within these makeshift facilities, Chechen men, women, and children were routinely and systematically raped, beaten, and brutally tortured with electric shocks and tear gas. Often confessions of being a guerrilla fighter were extracted during beatings and torture. Russian practices in these filtration camps violate various provisions of the Geneva Convention, including Article 3.1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits violence to life and person, cruel treatment and torture, and outrages upon personal dignity. Here's my favorite part: the elusiveness of accountability within the Russian legal system. So one way that you can try to prosecute these kinds of crimes is to bring them to a Russian court. Ready? Russia has thus far failed to establish any meaningful accountability process. It formed 3 new agencies to deal with the human rights abuses in Chechnya. The Office of the Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for Ensuring Human and Civil Rights and Freedoms of the Chechen Republic. A purportedly independent national commission headed by a former justice minister and a State Duma commission on normalizing the socio-political situation and human rights in Chechnya. These agencies were ineffective, largely due to their limited mandates. They could not subpoena evidence. They could not subpoena witnesses. They could not submit evidence to prosecutorial authorities. They, in fact, did not have any relationships with any prosecutorial authorities. So when we finally get to the Russian prosecutors and government ministries, they're also inadequate. Following the massacre in the Aldi district of Grozny, the Russian Ministry of Defense issued a denial. These assertions are nothing but a concoction not supported by fact or any proof, as reported in Novaya Gazeta, a Russian newspaper. And after that, a Russian prosecutor received a strict order from Moscow to slow down the investigation of the Aldi massacre, which they did, of course, do. The current inefficacy of the Russian domestic legal system dates back to the aftermath of the First Chechen War, when Russia did not prosecute any of its military personnel for violations of humanitarian law. According to the International Helsinki Federation, Russia's main military prosecutorial office opened and investigated 1,500 criminal cases against Russian soldiers serving in Chechnya. They convicted 27 conscripts, so 27 people they considered to be mercenaries, and only 6 of the 27 convictions involved crimes against the civilian population. Shocker. Response from the international community. During the 1994-96 Chechen War, the international community repeatedly condemned the atrocities, but remained silent when Russia failed to initiate investigations or punish perpetrators of humanitarian crimes. The international community's familiar silence is a familiar response. Once again, Russia has failed to prevent, investigate, or punish perpetrators of humanitarian crimes. Despite Russia's failure to account for its atrocities, the international community again has refrained from demanding accountability. During the war in Kosovo, British Prime Minister Tony Blair remarked, "The principle of non-interference in other countries' affairs must be qualified in important respects. War crimes, acts of genocide, and serious violations of human rights can never be an internal matter. Where Russian violations in Chechnya are concerned, however, the international community failed to demonstrate the same resolve. As with the first war, the international community's passiveness enabled Russia to continue a brutal campaign in Chechnya with impunity." It's funny that the word is used because that's the exact same language that I think the United States just used to say that they could not continue to act, to commit atrocities with impunity. But again, so far, there's been a lot of threats about bringing up charges in the ICC and the ICJ. And here's another one, another possible mechanism for demanding accountability, the UN Security Council, where Russia has veto. So, I mean, honestly, Russia's veto power threatens to obstruct any legal mechanism within the UN system, so that's basically a non-starter. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, would be another possible forum for pursuing claims against Russia. Formal charges have been filed with the ICJ against dictator Putin and other Russian leaders. Potentially liable parties include former President Boris Yeltsin, Army Commander Viktor Kazantsev, Armed Forces Chief of Staff Anatoly Kvashnin, and General Vladimir Chamanov. The ICG Lawsuit, Chechnya versus Russia, charges Putin and the Russian government with genocide in violation of Russia's obligations under the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The Chechen suit makes the following allegation of genocide. The Russian Federation and the former Soviet Union have ruthlessly implemented a systematic and comprehensive military, political, and economic campaign with the intent to destroy in substantial part the national, ethnical, racial, and religious group known as the Chechen people. This suit was filed by an American lawyer, and basically all it's asking is for the Russian government to take immediate measures to prevent any more genocide, and to ensure that the military, paramilitary, police, or irregular armed units do not commit any acts of genocide. Failed to do that. Then there's the European Court of Human Rights. Again, it's tough because there's a lack of jurisdiction. The European Union created the International Criminal Court, and you may recall, I think Milosevic, he was prosecuted there for the genocide and the crimes in the Bosnian Serbian conflict, the war there. But again, there are so few examples of any of this being successfully handled that it's very discouraging. So now I want to ask the question, could Russia be taken to court for its war in Ukraine? And the answer is probably not. In theory, the ICC has jurisdiction over aggression, but it's quite limited. Russia's large-scale military attack on Ukraine is viewed by many governments and legal scholars as a clear violation of international law. The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has twisted the language of the law to defend his actions, asserting that Russia's February 24th invasion is justified due to the unsupported claim that Kyiv is committing genocide in Ukraine's Donbass region against ethnic Russians. Ukraine responded by filing a suit against Russia on February 27th in the UN's highest court, rejecting Moscow's charge of genocide as absurd and asking the judges to order an immediate halt to the military operations. In seeking the International Court of Justice in The Hague to dismiss the Russian allegation, Kyiv is arguing that Ukraine and Russia have a dispute over the meaning of the 1948 Genocide Convention, a treaty they've both signed. So what does this achieve? It's kind of a clever thing for Ukraine to do because they're not arguing that there's a genocide being committed against them. They're arguing that there's a disagreement about what the term genocide means in the context of that convention, and that gives the court jurisdiction to hear the case. So again, if it's going to be about defining a word and who's got it wrong, right? I think we all know what genocide means, and I think we all know who's committing it, minus the Russian people who listen to their televisions and then repeat what they say. And I've been told, too, that they don't even think that. It's just a way to survive. Man up, Russians. Grow a backbone, get some courage. Stop parroting your televisions, because it's a lie. Okay. So where do we go from here? What are our other options? Let's see. Okay. So the UN Charter is one of the central articles that prohibits the use of force by one state against another. Russia is clearly in violation of that prohibition. And it's generally regarded to be kind of the foundation of modern international law, the cornerstone of the international legal order that was set up after World War II so that it would be illegal for one country to invade another without any justification, which is exactly what we're seeing in this instance. It's a core violation of a central principle of international law. There is nowhere to prosecute it, and there are no consequences. So, some of these legal scholars say that, you could try going through the Security Council, but Russia has a veto. International Court of Justice is a little bit constrained, so it can only deal with disputes between states in cases where both states have accepted the jurisdiction of the court, and a number of states have said that they'll accept the jurisdiction in all cases. Russia hasn't done this. Okay. So that's kind of out. Then you have the ICC, which has jurisdiction over aggression, but the jurisdiction in that case also is quite limited and wouldn't reach to the case of Russia and Ukraine at this stage. Let's see. Yeah. This article notes that there is limited precedent for having leaders being held criminally accountable for acts of aggression. After World War II, where the first time we had this kind of Nazi behavior with a psycho-fascist dictator, we had Nuremberg and we had the Tokyo trials. But if you look at both of those situations, they were held long after the fact, and they were conducted by the winners. So the losers got put on trial. The losers who were even big enough losers to be stuck there, to have to sit there and say, I was just following orders, either you had the courage to put a bullet in your brain, or you got on a plane to Argentina and you're out of there if you mattered. It's a difficult concept because under the principle of command responsibility, senior leaders in Russia could only be prosecuted if you could demonstrate that they ordered, planned, and supervised war crimes. The fact that they don't even admit that they're there, or why they're there, or what they're doing, or what, things that have happened. No one landed on the moon. So the idea that we would ever be able to kind of prosecute a chain of command with these Russian leaders is very unlikely to me. It seems I am sorely disappointed, not surprisingly so, though, by kind of the inefficacy of international law generally. So, with that, I would like to say that I understand, why a lot of the Western democracies, following particularly this meeting in The Hague earlier this week, to talk about kind of the atrocities being committed by the Russian Federation's troops. The outrage and the demand for investigations, the demand for justice, the demand to take it up with the ICJ, ICC, and I do also appreciate that wanting to declare Russia a terrorist state. There are consequences to that economically with sanctions and stuff, but I think we're already past. I mean, we're doing everything we would, even if they were declared a terrorist at this point. I believe, at least in the United States, we are. I believe. I don't know if they're on a no-fact list yet or what. A lot of people talk about this being kind of a symbolic gesture, something that would at least, be symbolically we're holding them accountable. I think that the people who are accountable don't give a shit about symbolism. And I understand that there's a value and a significance of symbolic gestures. But I am imploring the global democracies of the world, in Europe, Japan, Australia, South Korea, the United States, please don't mistake symbolism for action. And remember, gestures are not justice. This is a situation where there is no justice, and there won't be. I would hope we've learned that by now. Nuremberg and the Tokyo trials have been the only successful attempts to hold those responsible for genocide and crimes against humanity, and I don't think any of us would say that those provided justice for European Jews or the Chinese, who were savagely and barbarically raped and slaughtered by the Japanese, the Nazis systematically attempting to eradicate Jewish people from this earth. Did Nuremberg make up for that? Did that solve anything? I also ask, how are these filtration camps and deportations any different? Ukrainians have enough to rally around. They have a shared history, a shared culture, language, their politics, a love of free elections, a love of freedom of speech. They vote for Chewbacca if all the candidates on their ballot are corrupt. They have a wonderful flag, a Declaration of Independence, a fearless, heroic gentleman of a president, and the most badass military the 21st century has ever seen. I don't think they need any more symbolic gestures or thoughts and prayers. The ICC, the ICJ, the Hague cannot give them what they need. They need planes. I personally would love to hand over some B-52s and load them up with some gravity bombs, cluster bombs, precision-guided missiles, and joint direct attack munitions. Some AC-130J Ghost Riders, AC-130Us, AC-130W Stinger 2s, AGM-65 Mavericks, AGM-88 HARMs, and some MQIB Predators. And then, just, for shits and giggles, some B-52H Stratofortresses. I think you know what I'm saying. Last night, President Zelenskyy, ever gracious and always thankful, he thanked the United States of America for including supplemental assistance to Ukraine and preparing its defense budget for the new fiscal year, in particular expanding the capabilities of Ukraine's military aviation. He went on to say, "I want to once again express my gratitude to the American people, President Biden, and the U.S. Congress for all the support we receive. In the last 2 weeks, $3 billion were transferred to the Ukrainian budget from the United States of America, enabling us to ensure the current social needs of Ukrainians today. America is truly a leader in the global defense of freedom." And I'll be honest with you, I cried. I was proud of my country, and that doesn't happen often. And I was. So I would like to thank my president, my Congress, Secretary Blinken, the U.S. State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA, the think tanks, and all of you in Washington who understand that this is not just about Ukraine. This is this is fundamentally about our beliefs in freedom, in sovereignty, in democracy, things that I grew up believing were core values of the United States that we would defend with our lives. And I'm proud that we're stepping up, but we've got to do more. And I don't just mean the United States. I mean Australia. I was thrilled to hear about you stepping up there. They need more help, and they'll do the fighting. They just need the weapons. And in tonight's speech, President Zelenskyy spoke about Ukraine's declaration of sovereignty. He noted that there were some finer points that could have been made around security. I would imagine at the time that the excitement of finally getting to voice your independence and exercise some freedom after being held under the thumb of a totalitarian fascist government, you might not have had all the time in the world that Thomas Jefferson and his slaves did to wordsmith and tweak, a Declaration of Independence. But I would just like to remind Americans that we believe the following. And I don't mean to bore you, but I think these points are important and applicable. And so our Declaration of Independence reads, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all white middle-aged men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. The Russian Federation is attempting to exterminate the Ukrainian people. All the Ukrainian people want is for their own sovereignty, the right to determine their own political system, and they want a democracy. They want a government that's committed to the same principles that we have, that the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed, and that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, they have the right to abolish it, overthrow it, and institute a new one, and one that to them seems most likely to provide them with safety and happiness. I think it's extremely fair to say that that's not the Russian Federation, and that the sovereign state of Ukraine was doing a mighty fine job of that on its own before this invasion. I am working very hard on my Ukrainian. I am about to butcher some things, so please bear with me. It's a difficult language for English speakers to learn. I'm not going to lie to you. It's also pretty freaking cool. So if you don't mind, I'm going to try to say this. Okay. Okay. No, I can't say this one. This one I want to say thank you and good night. So I have something like Dziękuję I dobrej nocy. Залишаться в безпеці. Слава Україні. Героям слава. I apologize that I probably just messed that up, and I practiced it way more than that sounded. But please, glory to Ukraine, glory to its heroes. Please stay safe. Thank you for listening, and good night.